All right, welcome to the Heads or Tails podcast. I'm Dan Hunt with Meraki Performance here, shooting this out of the CatchMark SportsNet studio. Appreciate all you guys that have been with us along this journey, right? I think that we are on episode 12 now, and really the heart of the Heads or Tails podcast is to help equip coaches, leaders, individuals, both in the athletic sense, but also there's a lot of business parallels here. Trying to equip them to both understand how to develop the individual mindset of the athlete or the individual within a team. Also, how does that relate on the flip side to the collective mentality, all right? And our heart with Meraki Performance is that we want to help individuals and teams be at their best when it matters the most, all right? And so we focus a lot on the physiology and the psychology that helps people experience peak performance, all right? When we talk about physiology, we don't necessarily look at like how fast you're running or different things, the biomechanics of movement. We're looking at what's the biochemistry within your body as it relates to different experiences and in building human connection and how we can really maximize that cohesion. And then we're looking at the psychology, all right? What are you focusing on? What are you giving your attention to? And how do we give attention and really develop that skill to focus on the right things? And we're going to dive into that a little bit today and how that psychology works and in some action steps that we can take moving forward for some of us that are not playing in season anymore, fall coaches, fall athletes that are no longer in season. So that's really the heart, man. We are here to equip and resource you. We hear all the time how there's no resources, there's no information, there's no like, how do we take this and really use it? And that's why we're trying to sit in this gap. And here's the thing, is that there's a lot of people out there that are going to throw information out there, and it's up to us to really take that and say how it applies. One of the things that we really try to do is we try to help you connect the dots and seeing some actions that you can take moving forward. The other thing that I really want to say as we're building today is that at the end of the day, okay, building a team is a habit. All right, I'm going to say that again. Building a team is a habit. There's a lot of there's an approach to this that a lot of people think, hey man, we bring our people in once a year, we have a conversation, boom, we're good. That's not how you build a team. Building a team is not an event. Building a team is a habit. Team building is a habit, all right? And we're going to talk a little bit about what's like the foundation to those habits, and then maybe some things that we can do in terms of building habits over the next year. For some of us that, again, are not necessarily, we're not playing right now. Like some of us, our seasons have ended, okay? And we want to help really lean in right now where there might be some frustration, some like hurt, some pain, some like, gosh, man, we could have done more. I want to help those coaches and athletes go, how do we use that right now and leverage it for our benefit? Because I'm the firm believer, and I say it often, nothing changes if nothing changes. So what are you going to do about it? Like nobody's just going to come and go, hey man, you thought really hard about this and you wanted it to be different, so next time it's going to be different. That's not how this works, all right? And so I want to help people leverage that right now and say, based on what I'm experiencing right now, based on maybe some like, ooh, I'm seeing what they're doing and man, I wish we were there. What are we going to do with that? How are we going to leverage that? Okay. And so what now? Some of us are transitioning from fall sport. We're no longer in playoffs. We're out of it. Some of us are moving into what's the sport we're playing for the winter, which is cool. But I want to focus on a little bit of like those teams that had desire to do more. Like what now? What do you do now? And the question that I would have for you right away is I would have you step back and say 2025, right? Late November, 2025. What does the picture look like? Right? What does the picture look like for our team? Okay, what different aspects do we have? What are we doing? Are we still playing? Who's there? Who's not there? What does this picture look like for us? All right? And I want you to sit in that. Zoom into that. What are different aspects? What does the relationships look like? What does the skill look like? How is the overall mentality? What does it look like as we're performing on the court or the field? What are some of these things? Okay. We need to be able to say, what does that picture look like? Because without that picture, we're just running in the dark, hoping for a different solution, hoping for a different outcome. We have to identify, what does that picture look like? All right. And there's a reason for this, because that picture also has a story behind that. All right. What is the story of that picture? All right. Because the thing is that we have a year now. We have a year to really look at how are we developing. And some of us go, hey man, like season's done. We'll connect with them in the summer. I'm going to challenge that. You have athletes that are 100% going to be in season. You have athletes that are going on and playing different sports. But my challenge to you is, how do you build and connect with those athletes even though they're in season? How do you begin to build the story and communicate the picture, and even bringing them into the fold of what does this picture look like? Okay? Giving them some ownership and some space to really craft it as their own, right? To invest in, how do we want this to look moving forward? Okay? Because the thing is that we have a year of formation. We have a year of development. We have a year of, how is this going to look and how are we going to build to this? And we cannot just allow this to happen by chance. I can tell you right now, the teams that we've been fortunate enough to work with that are still competing right now, I can tell you a core to that is like, they knew what the picture was, like going into January 2024 last year. They knew what the picture was. And even though they had athletes in other sports, and even at the college level that athletes weren't in different sports, obviously they were focused on one thing. They began to craft, what does this picture look like? All right? What does this picture look like? And it's not just achievement. It's not just the outcome that they desired. It was also, what are some different aspects of this that builds to that? What are the actions, habits, and behaviors that we're going to have that builds to this picture? We broke things down. They broke things down, okay? So we began to build that picture. And the teams that are still competing right now have a story. They have a picture. They're living into this picture. They're evaluating, where are we at with this picture? How is this picture coming? And even if it's not directly this picture, that's not maybe the verbiage, that they have an idea of this. They had vision for what this is going to look like, okay? And here's the thing, and why this is important is that, one, you can either allow formation to just happen by chance, and it will, right? There's a lot of things that vie for our attention, that fight for our attention. And if we aren't intentional about how we want this to look, like, it'll happen, like things will take place, but it's not going to be where we want it to. And I would argue that we are probably going to be formed into something that we didn't want to, or that minimally are not going to help us get to where we want to go, okay? And formation really boils down to a couple different things, okay? Formation boils down to, one, the stories that we tell ourselves, all right? And a lot of that is what we've talked about in the past, the mindset. Okay. A foundational piece of that is the stories that we tell ourselves. As human beings, we drive narratives. Okay. We give meaning to things. We tell stories within our mind. And so a big piece of this formation is, what is the story we're telling ourselves? Okay. And as leaders, we can lean in and say, what is the story we're telling about ourselves as it relates to our program, as it relates to our team, as it relates to where we're going, or what we just did, or what we just experienced, and how we're going to use that moving forward, okay? It's the stories we tell ourselves. That's one, okay? The other piece is the habits, the actions, the behaviors, the things that we are going to do and stay disciplined or not disciplined to, okay? It's those habits. Those habits are forming. Those habits are helping us form into either who we want to be, or who we are envisioning ourselves to become, or it's doing the opposite and it's moving us. It's really a detractor, or it's diminishing that, okay? So it's those habits, all right? And I would argue that the stories we tell ourselves are informing those habits, okay? And then finally, it's the relationships. It's the relationships we're building, the relationships we're forming. But then I'd also say, what are the relationships with different experiences or different aspects of our development or the program as we're moving forward too? Okay, there's relationships within that, and looking and leaning in. How does that look? Okay, So those are the three things that we really have to pause and think through. What are the stories that we're telling ourselves? What's the story of this program? What's the story of where we're going? Okay. What are the habits and the actions and the behaviors that are going to build to that are really going to build that story or build that picture? Okay. And then finally, what do the relationships look like? What do the relationships look like with each other? What do the relationships need to look like with individuals, with themselves? What do the relationships need to look like with the work and the skill development, with the schoolwork, with the weight room, with our nutrition, with all of these things, with the diving into the X's and O's and how we're going to become masters of our craft? Like, what do the relationships with that look like? What is the relationship with the community? How are we going to bring the community in the fold and really gain and continue to cultivate support around what we're trying to do? What does that relationship look like? Okay. And we have to lean into that and start beginning to look ahead and craft that. Okay. And why does this apply? Okay. Some people are like, okay, I'm just this coach, and this is how it applies, guys, is that this is going to be the vision in the blueprint in the pathway moving forward. The teams that are playing right now did not wait until the summer to say, okay, here we go, starting the season. They were already building to that, okay? The teams that are playing right now were not just coming in and saying, okay, now what is it going to look like? What are we going to do now? They were already crafting and looking at, what is this aspect of the offseason and how can we get creative and leverage this time to keep building for that? And some of us might be saying, well, man, I don't have contact with my players. How am I going to do this? There are so many other ways to really build that story and really build that picture, even with them in other sports. Okay. One of the things I would say is, how do you create connection right away and begin to say, how do we bring some key leaders into this and say, even though we're playing different sports, let's also keep in the forefront or maybe even a little bit in the background, our fall sport, right? Let's keep that in mind, and how even now when we're competing in the winter sport, that's building to that. Okay. What do we want this to look like? Okay, what do we want? Who's going to be around the table? What are the things that we value, and how are those values going to show up? What are some goals that we have? Do we want to achieve X, Y, and Z? Okay, let's look at now with the reality that we have with some guys competing, some gals competing in other sports and others. What are the checkpoints, or what are the key performance indicators that we have to have with the people in season playing a winter sport and out of season to keep building towards that, right? It's asking those questions. I think a lot of us just go, man, these athletes are playing different sports, and I'm just, right? And I would argue, how do you get creative now? Is it through some group text messages? Is it every other week Zoom call? Okay. Is it being able to touch base with them? Maybe we're having a lunch together. Maybe we're coming together, and once a month we're still going to have a lunch together during lunchtime. Once a month. I know I just said once a month again, but once a month we're going to connect and say, hey man, how are things going? Even if it's not talking about what the fall looks like, we're still building relationships, because that's part of formation. All right. We're still building and cultivating those relationships, because again, building a team is a habit. It's not just a one-time thing. All right. And then the other piece with this too is it's compounding. We're building up to this. The actions that we're willing to take now are actually going to create the foundation and the momentum and the velocity for the fall. The things that we're doing now, the getting in the weight room, the breaking down film even now and saying, hey, here's some skills we can start looking at. And if this is the skills we need to have, how do we reverse engineer it into the most basic, simplistic thing we can do now to start building to that? Okay. How do we start reworking some mental maps? How do we start reworking some mindsets? How do we start having some conversations about what we value, how those values show up in the classroom, in the sport that they're playing now, in the community, right? In their schoolwork? How do we have that show up in the weight room in the off season? All these different things feed into the story and build confidence in this story, not only being really clear, but also the investment of, look at all the things that we did. We didn't just show up in August, but we showed up from January till now, right? The preparation and the development didn't just halt. We actually kept building, even if the building was 10% of what our total focus could be because we were doing other things. We still gave 10% instead of nothing, okay? And we end up building slowly but surely a foundation and building those blocks, all right? So that's how this applies, guys. That's how we can begin to start looking at program development is not just an in-season, preseason thing. Program development is constant. Program development is all around. And program development doesn't look like, oh man, half my girls are doing this or doing that. I just can't do anything, right? It's challenging that status quo and saying, how do we bring people in the fold now? How do we bring people to the table now, right? And maybe some people are saying, hey, they're playing club sports. Great. How do you get involved with that? How do you support them in that? How do you get connected with that? How do you check in with that and see how that's going, right? How do you challenge them and say, hey, here's an area of growth we really need to see coming into next season. Here's an area of growth that I challenge you to lean into in this club season, all right? Oh, you're playing basketball. Great. Like, I'm going to show up to these games. I'm going to see how these things are going. But also, how are you continuing to develop in these areas of your mindset and how it applies to basketball, even though you were just playing volleyball? Because I would argue the same way we're showing up in volleyball is the same way we're probably showing up in basketball. And if there's deficiencies in that or areas we can grow in that translates to how do we grow in basketball, all right? Again, it's having the mindset and building the connections that it's not one season then done. It's how do we build the athlete? How do we build the individual through seasons of different sports in fall, winter, and spring, okay? And helping, really, another thing we can do is build connections with other coaches and other programs, all right? And not looking at this as just, here we are, we're done. Now we'll see them in the spring, okay? And if we're parents of athletes, I would challenge you to start thinking, how do we build connections and string-long progression across the entire year as well, okay? And the other piece that is really interesting, and I'm going to dive into this a little bit because we talk a lot about, yes, leveraging physiology and psychology, but the real reason is we want to help people get into flow. We want to help people get into that optimal human state. We want to help athletes be fully present in the moment and really be able to maximize themselves through peak performance, okay? And so that's not always going to happen, but there are specific things that we can do to help that take place more often or more consistently or get there more often or closer to that, okay? And there's some unique research coming out right now is that, there's obviously flow triggers and things you can do, having a clear goal, right? Being fully immersed in the moment and getting that immediate feedback and sending immediate feedback with the task that you're doing. The skill challenge balance, right? We have the appropriate amount of skill based on the challenge, but I have just enough skill or just over skill based on challenge, and it's not vice versa, or the challenge is so low that I'm like the skill I just have so much beyond that it's almost boring to me, right? There has to be that balance there, okay? But the other thing that the research is showing is that there's like this millisecond. There's this millisecond when we face the challenge, and we've talked about the flow cycle, that performance cycle, but there's this millisecond that really your brain has of like, am I going to be fearful of the challenge or am I going to drop into flow? All right. And I'm going to say that again, like they're finding there's this millisecond, there's this fraction of time that we are in the moment. We are competing, we're doing this thing and things are happening. We're reading, we're getting feedback. And there's this moment in time where it's like, we subconsciously decide, am I fearful of this situation? Am I going to move into this fight, flight, freeze? Am I going, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? Or do I drop into flow? And do I become fully immersed in the moment, trusting my skills, trusting my ability, getting to this non-thinking state where I'm just in it, right? And doing a lot of work with individual athletes, I constantly help them evaluate, where are you when things are going well and where are you when things aren't going well? And time again, it never ceases to amaze me. It's so clear. When things are going really well, I can't tell you what I'm thinking because I'm not thinking. I'm just in it. I'm just rolling. I'm just doing my thing. I'm fully trusting. When things aren't going well, I'm thinking a lot. I'm going, what about this? What about that? I'm potential outcomes. Where am I at here? And I'm over analyzing, and I'm giving meaning to things that I shouldn't be giving meaning to. Okay. And so we have that split second. And here's why I'm really breaking this down and sharing with you. And this can apply not only to the athletes going into season, but also I want coaches to hear this too, because this is a part of why creating the picture and story and building these relationships and the habits and the forming matters so much, because it builds up to this moment in time where the athlete doesn't necessarily choose. It becomes instinctual. Am I going to fear, or am I going to drop into this flow? Am I going to fear, or am I going to trust? Right? And it's evaluating, how do I view this thing? And I believe in looking at this research and what they're finding out, that millisecond is really driven by the stories we tell ourselves. It's really driven by this instinctual, I have the confidence that I have done all these things, I have built up to this, and the story that I'm telling myself and the things that I'm doing is building to this bigger picture that I'm a part of. And I'm going to go, this experience, like, I'm good here. I know the story and I'm driving the story. I know the picture and I'm moving this picture forward, right? I know the things that I've done and the investment that I've had and the work that I've done, and I'm more easily able to just go, boom, here we go, right? And I would argue that the individual athletes that are able to get into that flow state instead of fear, that get into that, oh, we're good, here we go, or that non-thinking place, has developed this internal story, has developed this internal dialogue, has developed the internal talk and the mechanisms that they're able to drop into that and just move and go and fully trust themselves, okay? And the athletes that don't are the ones that don't have that story, that don't have that mindset, that have not built those habits. Even if they're on a minute scale, like a small scale, they have not spent the time doing those things and connecting the dots. And I think that that's where coaches and even parents can help bridge the gap. Because the thing is that even if you're in a winter sport, I'm talking to high school athletes right now, even if you're in a winter sport right now and you're no longer playing football and you're no longer playing volleyball, you're no longer playing soccer, the habits that you're developing, the story you're beginning to build, the work and the effort that you're putting in is continuing to build you as an athlete, that's continuing to build you for future seasons and future sports, right? It's connecting those dots. It's not siloed. It's not, I'm just going to show up and I'm going to be this here, but then I'm going to move to here, and none of that applies. It's connecting those dots and being able to begin to create the story. Because again, we drive narratives, and us helping them connect the dots, that the work that you do right now is building for future experiences. It's building this mindset. It's driving this story. And that's where I think, from an athletic perspective, okay, from an athletic department perspective, there is huge opportunity to say, how are we building the story across the athletic department? And as a program, if I'm a football coach or volleyball coach or a soccer coach, okay, I'm leaning in and saying, how do I keep connecting with these athletes and helping them build the story to where we're going, and how the work that they're doing with their current sport is continuing to build that. And I'm leaning in and working with those coaches as well. I'm having these conversations, all right? I'm having these little interactions. I'm continuing to reinforce and build that story. The athletes that aren't in those sports, I'm bringing them in the fold and saying, hey, how are we connecting every other week? How are we building in the weight room? How are we also showing up and supporting those guys and gals that are in winter sports that were on our teams in the fall? How are we building those relationships there? Okay. How are we continuing to build the strength in who we are and what we're trying to do moving forward? Okay. So my action steps for you guys moving forward. All right. I want to give you specific actions. I want you to clarify the picture. I want you to begin to lean in and say, 2025, we're sitting down at the end of Thanksgiving, right? what did the picture look like? What's the picture, right? What is that picture for our team in that season? Okay. And I want you to begin to start asking yourself the questions and begin to walk through, what does that picture look like? What did we experience? What were the relationships? What were the skills that we saw on the team, right? Maybe even get granular. What's the offense we're running? What's the scheme? What's the formation that we're running? We're in a defense. What are we doing here? What volleyball, what are we doing different here or there? What does our base defense look like? What are our middles doing? What are some skills that we need to develop to really create some distance, okay? What are some achievable things that we want to see next year? What are the goals that we're going to set? Start building the picture, okay? Bring your athletes into this, all right? Start asking the pictures or what the picture is from their perspective. And then begin to say, what are the things we need to do right now going into January to start building to that picture? And then let's say February, what do we do? Let's evaluate. Where are we at? What are we doing with this? What needs to adjust? What have we learned? Where are we going from there? And start creating some feedback and some ownership and some progress and some blueprint for these athletes to lean into, okay? And it's going to look different. You're going to have to get creative. Some athletes obviously are in season, okay? And so they're not going to be in the weight room with all your people. They're not going to be able to maybe come to these conversations all the time. But how do you keep them in the fold? Maybe it's a virtual meeting. Again, maybe it's a lunchtime conversation. Maybe it's getting together with a few of them in different times. I don't know. But start getting creative. What I experience is a lot of, we just can't do this. I don't know how to do this, right? And I would ask, not we can't do it, but how might we? How might we do this? How might we be able to take one step further and closer in really developing this program and not saying from January till August, there's nothing to do, but begin to start building the blueprint. Coaches, especially if you have a coaching staff, how do you build your coaching staff? How is their capacity or skill that they need to lean into and learn? What are some areas that they can develop and grow? And let's not just go to a conference and say, hey, we went to a conference, now we're good. But like, hey, what did we learn from that? What are we building towards? How do we start doing things now to build the foundation and the systems and processes? So come August, things are rolling and we're in summer and we're moving and grooving. And then maybe the other piece is, how do we begin having conversations from an athletic department perspective of what's the next right action we can do to string a lot of these together, okay? I believe the athletic programs that are really going to create distance are the athletic programs that say from the department-wide perspective, how do we build the foundation of an athlete that we want? What does that DNA look like at the high school level? What does that DNA look like? Let's make things really, really, really clear and build that foundation, because there is so many different things vying for these athletes' attention that, the new flashy thing, this is important, that's important, right? How do we say, no, if you're competing here and you're an athlete here, these are the things that we believe are vitally important, and start looking at from a department-wide, how do we develop that year long, and what does that look like, all right? And then keep evaluating progress, guys, all right? Feedback is critical for performance, so critical for performance. And we need to give these athletes not only targets, but help them understand how are they moving and what's the progress towards that, all right? So there's some actionable things. I wanted to, highlight this as some of these programs are moving out of fall and transitioning. What's next? Okay. Hopefully this was some clarity. Actually, it's not hopeful. I know that if you take action on this, you're going to bring clarity to it. Okay. I know for a fact that you're going to bring clarity to it. The question is, are you willing to take the action towards it? Because nothing changes if nothing changes. Are you willing to do something different to build the picture come 2025, November 2025? All right. I appreciate you guys joining. We are very excited to, again, continue to offer this. And we just ask you guys, if you've enjoyed this, please pass it along to other people. All right. We want to be the resource here, not only in West Michigan, but we want to keep building the impact and be able to provide good content and good information and actionable things that you can do. Okay. We are always striving to make things clear. And I totally understand that my mind works different in that I've been in this for quite a while. And so I might communicate and say things and just take understanding for granted. And so I ask you, if something wasn't clear, please reach out. We want to know. We want to keep equipping and supporting you. And if you have questions or you have topics that you want us to dive into and things to answer, reach out to us. We want to know those things, and we want to keep answering questions and helping support you in creating an environment where not only you get the most out of it, but your athletes get the most out of it as well. And same thing with athletes. If you have questions, please reach out to us. We'd love to answer those questions. Connect with us on social at Meraki Perform or our website at merakiperform.com. We're trying to pump a lot of content and information out there. And you can also connect with our newsletter, Unleash Greatness. We believe greatness is within you. We believe that when you create the right environment, right, and you constantly develop that environment, that not only individuals can see that greatness, but that they're able to live into that. And that's our focus. We want to help you bring that out. And so we appreciate you guys being here. We wish you guys well and keep chasing this down, all right? Greatness is within.